views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, nice to see you. It's time for the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to reporters and writers and journalists and anybody who's putting stuff out. And that does include photographers, filmmakers, book writers. And in our second segment, it will include comic book creators. So we're going to do that. But to start, we're going to get real serious and real important first with the executive editor of City Limits. We're thrilled that Jeanmarie Evelly has found time in her busy week to spend a few moments with us. Nice to have you with us.
Hi, Gary. Nice to be here. Thanks.
So you did a story, heightened food insecurity in New York City likely to persist long after pandemic wanes, experts say. And I will just introduce it with my own impression. It's just disgraceful. If maybe even before housing, the fundamental responsibility of a proper society is to make sure people have enough to eat. And we really have, I mean, they call it food insecurity. You can call it hunger. You can call it whatever you want. So what did you discover? The numbers that I saw in your article are bone chilling.
Yeah, well, that story in particular was specifically about a report that was put out by one particular organization that does food rescue, and they salvage food. It's called City Harvest. You've probably heard of them. They've been around for a long time. Yeah, so they've been around for several decades, and they put out a report just about their kind of operations in 2021. And that was specifically the numbers, was looking at their kind of output in serving food pantries and in serving, meeting the need for hunger across the city in this over the last year. But we have been reporting on hunger as an issue, obviously, throughout the pandemic, first in response to kind of the immediate shutdown during the early days of 2020, when I think a lot of people, it was very visible at the time, right? Because I think there were a lot of these very visible kind of food pantry lines that we saw everywhere in places like the Bronx.
I think people were shocked. Their jobs were gone, and they were like, whoa, and I just don't have money right now. It was before the various governmental subsidies, which you note have had a positive impact. And so, yes, the lines were long, and it was like, oh my goodness, it's, the 1920s stock market crash all over again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that has been something that obviously, and hunger's been an issue, and food insecurity was an issue in New York and, across the country before the pandemic, but the pandemic obviously increased that need exponentially. And what this story really looked at was just how that need persists and sort of how stubborn it is. So the City Harvest contact that I spoke to, the executive director there, was saying that in their work, for example, after the 2008 economic crash, the food insecurity levels that they experienced after that economic downturn really took, she said, almost a decade to recede again.
Wow.
So even, after the kind of inciting incident that might cause that need to skyrocket recedes into the background a little bit and isn't making headlines anymore, the need is still there. And she was saying how they finally got the numbers back down to sort of that pre-recession, 2008 recession, and then COVID hit. And then obviously it went right back up.
So, well, the numbers that you quoted from the City Harvest report, that they gave out more than 14 million pounds of food in June 2020. And I mean, that's an incomprehensible number.
Yeah.
And they distributed more than 11 million pounds of food every month. So it's 11 million pounds every month, which is more than twice their regular output, which was like 5.5 million.
Yeah, and this is just one organization. So if you think about what kind of all these networks of kind of food rescue systems, obviously the city of New York had its own food emergency response program, setting up food centers at schools in those kind of first bunch of months. So that was their output. And one of the striking things that she was describing to me too was how they, This isn't a group that normally purchase food themselves. They're a nonprofit. They usually do what they call food rescue, which is take unused surplus food from restaurants or farms and things like that and repurpose it for food pantries. But they have kicked in their kind of emergency plan, I guess you could say, when the pandemic started, and they've been purchasing food every month and have spent a significant amount in addition to the normal amount of food they would.
Yes, because the donations they would get, let's say, from farms and restaurants used to be somewhat sufficient.
Yeah.
But now the need is so great, so there has to be funding and other things. There's a number in there that unless I'm not understanding, the number of people in New York City metro area unable to afford enough food peaked at 6.219 million in May of 2020. If you've got 8 or 9 million people in the city, that's 2/3 of the city. I somehow to me, maybe the number is wrong. That just seems like a lot. and if it is a lot, wow, it's it's startling. I do want to I want to mention this, and I guess everything is your personal experience. I was walking, and you know the area because you know the Bronx well. I was at 242nd Street and Broadway. I'd come out. I was walking through Van Cortlandt Park, and there's one of those friendly fridges over there on right, and these are just people trying to help other people. And so the refrigerator is there, and people come by and donate food, and they even, like you'll see here, they get a Cobb salads from a restaurant that's got leftovers or made too much and didn't sell it, and those kinds of things. But to stand there, like when a subway comes, because that's a pretty big transit hub, when the subway empties out, and watch people come off the subway and go right to the fridge. It as I said, it's just it's a disgrace. So here's a question that you and I can conspire and we get the problem solved. How do we deal with this? Well, it seems to me it takes a village and all that. We talk about donations, we talk about restaurants, but it's poverty, right? This is the bottom line. Poverty and jobs and all that.
I think it's again one of those kind of interwoven economic issues. And just to touch on that number that you mentioned, that's the stat for the New York metro area. So that includes like New Jersey.
All right, so it's out of 20 million.
Connecticut. It's kind of the tri-state area.
That's how you got.
Just double checked it.
No, but I have to say that's how you got to be the editor, and I'm just
just making sure. I was like, did I get it wrong?
Perfect.
So the way that the sources were talking to me about it was that food becomes. I think the way that she described it was it's like this elastic expense, right? So especially this month, we're going to have the state's eviction moratorium is going to end. If you are somebody who is on a very, very tight budget, you are not going to skip paying rent if you can swing it, right? But you might skip your grocery bill or cut back on that. Food is kind of the thing that people, I think, they make that cut first, which obviously has huge implications for health and well-being outside of that. But I think there is this kind of tendency to do that when you're in a tough spot, is that maybe you're going to pull back on the food.
So you don't buy, a nicer meat in the store, let's say, and you'll go to a TV dinner, which you can buy a half a dozen of those for whatever. For
or maybe you're going to skip a meal, or parents who will skip meals so that their kids can have a meal. That sort of.
When people are tight, they say, well, I'll skip lunch this week. That kind of thing. That is a very, very good point. One thing which you did mention, and goodness, that's another whole show, and I'm sure you or your staff will do writing on it, is the whole idea of the eviction moratorium.
Yeah.
I wonder if there will be any extension, or this is it.
We're keeping tabs on that for sure. I know that obviously, it's yet to be determined whether or not I'm sorry, my dog is like growling. He wants me to pick him up. So I apologize
he might be hungry.
Noises in the background. It's my dog.
He might be hungry.
It's not me. He probably is. But I know that lawmakers are pushing for this good cause eviction bill this legislative session, and they're hoping that that could also help keep people in their homes. It'll make it harder for landlords to evict tenants without having to show cause. So we'll see. I think it ends the 15th. So
What was instructive in your piece was, and I'll just quote right from it, experts say the hunger crisis could have been worse were it not for the number of government benefit and relief programs that were rolled out in response to the COVID crisis. I understand it costs money. What costs more? It's like
Yeah.
this situation with people not being able to eat or saying, I mean, and I'm trying not to be political about it. I'm trying to be practical about it. And I see these regular Bronxites working and coming down and having to go to a fridge to get food for tonight.
Yeah.
You know, so that's another thing that I guess goes back, and you mentioned this was to the Biden Build Back Better plan, because there would be childcare money and all kinds of other things in there that would help needy families.
Yeah, I think that that's one thing the report really spelled out, was that those earlier benefits really did help kind of alleviate what would have been a lot worse in terms of need.
Do you do you have now City Harvest did that report? Um, do we have a sense of how bad in the Bronx? I know there are so many organizations, whether it be WEDCO or Bronx Works and all these other groups that are, working on this. Do we have a sense of, or we just make the assumption we're on a lower end economically and health
Yeah,
wise, and so
I don't
we have
know.
it worse?
I was actually trying to find that right before we got on this phone call. I was looking at some of the
You knew I would ask.
So I don't have those hard numbers in front of me at the moment. I don't have recent ones, but I do know that the Bronx's unemployment rate is the highest out of all the boroughs too.
Yep.
So obviously that feeds into the issue of like who can afford what, and it definitely, like we said, it's very interconnected. All these different things.
Right, and here we are, first week of January. We're going to take a look at that, circle that January 15th date, because that is a date that things might change. Talk to me about I don't know, what's your day like? What are you working on, and what's next for City Limits that we should look for?
City limits. So we are obviously, we had just had a big piece that came out today. If you want to check it out, I believe one of my coworkers had been on your show earlier in the month to talk about part of our series, which is looking back on the impact of the de Blasio rezonings that took place earlier in his
Of
term.
course.
So SA, I think, came on to talk about the Jerome Avenue rezoning and the reporting that she did on that.
That's right.
It's not Bronx related, but we have a big story out today related to the impact of the East New York rezoning and talking about sort of how that impacted home prices in that neighborhood.
I beg to differ. A rezoning in another part of New York City is a Bronx story, because Eric Adams has not sworn off the concept, to say the least, and there's no question it's going to come our way soon enough. Thank you so much. And coming up next, we will be doing, I'll put on my other hat, and we'll be doing something totally different. We'll talk with a comic book creator who has a very interesting point of view, a different point of view about who comic book heroes should be. So we'll take a break and we'll be right back. Don't go.